I find if I'm upset and I sit down on the ground with my back up against a tree, it really will do that. It will sort of absorb your anxiety for you. I mean, and I feel like it does it happily.
Yeah,
it just
it does.
sucks it down back into the earth with its roots and just, it's already grounded.
Hello, mystics, and welcome to the Occult Unveiled. I'm your host, Ashley Ryan. Today, I have an enchanting episode in store for you, brimming with the mystique of nature's secrets. Joining us are three captivating souls who have delved deep into the world of plant magic. Our lovely panel includes Chris Young and Susan Ottaviano, authors of The Green Witch's Guide to Magical Plants and Flowers, and Colby Michael, the author of Poison Path of Occult Herbalism. Welcome, friends.
Hello.
Great to be here.
Hey.
I have a question for all of you. And in both of your books, you talk about we can learn from plants. And I don't think a lot of us think about that. Can you explain to me, what are the lessons we can learn from them?
Chris?
I mean, I think of different plants specifically, like I think about spending time with morning glories and, really watching how they go and how they roll. And I always come away with tenacity is something that I pull from morning glories. And other plants do other things, like rose obviously has love energy. And it just comes down to slowing down and listening to the plants. And also I have this amazing, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but this encyclopedia of magical herbs, that's my go-to. But yeah, that in a nutshell.
What about you, Susan?
We should listen to nature and the plants and let them inform us of the information. And I think that's what we're trying to do with our book about mindfulness and about just listening to nature, listening to the moon, listening to the world around us and being more available.
Colby, you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think we could do a whole class on what we can learn from plants and how we learn from plants and how gnosis and knowledge and information gets transmitted, and just on the most basic and physical level, they help us to connect with our bodies and our surroundings and just sort of our awareness of the material as much as the spiritual.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, all of you are talking about how different plants give off different energies. And when we say plants, are we talking about all plants, even the weeds that we see in the side cracks? Like, we have things we can learn from those as well?
Yeah, I think all plants have a magical essence to them. And yes, I think even the weeds, sometimes especially the weeds.
Yeah.
I mean, in our book, we use Queen Anne's lace for love. And that's considered, I think, a weed in most places. But we think it's important.
And tenacity as well. Right?
Yeah, tenacity. Weeds definitely represent tenacity and the ability of survival and the ability to really dig in.
I love that.
I mean, we've been working with yarrow. Do you consider yarrow a weed, Chris?
No, I do not.
Okay.
But I need, a lot of weeds I don't consider weeds.
But we have some yarrow recipes today, and I've been working with it lately, and it's amazing plant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into that in just a second. I'd love to learn more, but I know you have a yarrow tincture you would like to share. But Colby, you work with other plants that are considered to be dangerous or disliked by society. Why did you choose to start working with those?
Well, they kind of chose me, and as we see with a lot of our invasive plants and weeds and plants that we try to kind of domesticate and control that seem to resist that domestication tend to take on this sort of adversarial or mischievous nature, and kind of diving into that and our perceptions between these sort of perceived boundaries and why certain plants are designated as such has a lot to teach us about our relationship with plants, as well as our relationship with other human beings and other sentient entities.
Interesting. Do you believe that plants have souls?
I do.
Absolutely.
I do.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I think everything that's alive has sentience and ultimately a soul. Like they have, yeah. I mean, short answer, yes.
Yeah. It reminds me of the theosophy lesson that I learned a long time ago about the different layers of life and different kinds of souls. So at the bottom, there was minerals. So that's salt. We think of the different, the elements on our chemistry chart. They all fit there. And then they move on to plants, and then plants have their own. Now, I think soul is very hard to define, but it's a kind of awareness, a consciousness that we start to see in plants. Then we move into animals, and animals are usually controlled by a group soul. So the group spirit of the birds. When we see birds fly, we know that they don't have little headphones saying, all right, we're going to move left, we're going to move right. They all just fly together. And that is an example of a group spirit. The way that animals move up is through love. So they can achieve a higher level of sentience or self-awareness, which is human or human souls. So I absolutely agree with all of you that the way that a plant vibrates is so special. On TikTok, one of my favorite channels to watch is people who connect synthesizers to plants, and you hear the music that they make.
Yeah.
Oh, you're familiar with that.
And they also, they've proven that they respond to music, that plants change their vibration with music, and that they respond to pain. They respond I can't remember, I think it was in the 70s when they hooked them up to the little machines and did all these different tests where they would expose them to fire, and the levels would go crazy because the plant was kind of freaking out. So, yeah.
The first time I remember learning that plants were sentient, I was in kindergarten. Now, I was a weird little kid, and I didn't like to eat lunch in the lunchroom. So I'd go outside, and I saw there was a plant. It was I think a dandelion. It was yellow, and it was growing under the bench that I was eating my lunch in. And then I looked at it, and I noticed it had this hard lean to the right because I was trying to get the sunlight. And like my little 6-year-old brain exploded, oh my God, this thing knows it needs to eat. It's alive. Because I just learned about photosynthesis. What about you guys? When was the first time that you realized plants were alive?
I think for me, I always was drawn to plants, flowers, especially, but plants that I loved. And this isn't something you should do now, but as a kid, I didn't know about nurseries. I didn't know where you could get plants from. And so I would go out into the woods behind my parents' house, and I would dig up things that I liked. And, they would sometimes wilt from the stress of moving. And, and I just noticed things like that. And then I would see how they would respond to care. And like you said, I was around 6 or so. And I knew that they had to be taken care of. They had to get the right amount of moisture and all that for them to be upright and happy. So it was probably around that time that I was like, oh, okay.
That's so cute. What about you, Susan?
I was a thief.
Well, I guess for me, like all living things, I'm a real cook. So especially with plants, as far as food goes and color and how they would make me feel, and how the outdoors of the earth were strong for me. I had a strong sense of feeling at home there when I was growing up. I'm an artist. So for me, the outdoors was really about creating and experiencing it that way, visually, and taking that in and observing. I think that's the number one thing, observing. And that's what I feel like I've learned. I'm the food guy, and Chris is the plant person in our partnership. But for me, I got to really analyze all these plants and flowers that Chris found for us and really see them on a whole other level.
Oh, you made your own herbology class together. That's so precious. I love that. All right, Colby.
I think I've always known on some level. I could owe that to my grandparents taking me out to the garden at a really, really young age, and just seeing the connection that my grandfather has to the plants that he grows. And, even before I had any sort of magical, spiritual context for it, I knew that there was something there.
That's so funny, Coby, because with me, it was my grandpa too. When I was a little kid, I would help him do yard work and, work in his garden. And I think that's where I got my first appreciation for nature. I would say nature in general. I would say that was the first time I really kind of absorbed that he was feeding the birds and feeding the plants. And we would take carrot sticks out to the horses that were way behind his yard on a, farm somewhere. So I think that's when, I think it was my grandpa too.
Yay for grandpa.
Yay, grandpa.
Yes.
My grandfather was actually a very big gardener, and so was my grandmother on my father's side. But when I was younger, I wasn't that interested in that. I'm sorry to say, you guys were ahead of me.
Well, they were the generation of victory gardens, right?
What they were doing.
Yeah, I know my parents were the victory garden generation.
I've heard my grandpa use that word before.
Yeah.
Totally.
What does it mean? What's a victory garden?
Victory gardens after the war, after World War II, everybody came home and they became super self-sufficient when it came to food for a lot of reasons. And so a lot of people planted what they called victory gardens in their backyards. And my dad had a whole big one in the backyard. So he always had it. I mean, I was a late baby for a World War II generation, couple, but I totally grew up with his victory garden.
That's cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think we're seeing kind of a revisit of that right now in self-sufficiency.
Yeah, I think COVID really kind of got that going.
Very cool.
My grandparents were Italian, so they were from Italy, first generation and second generation. So that's the way that they lived. They grew. They had a garden.
Yeah,
connected to the earth. Yeah. Susan, I would like you to show us the beautiful yarrow and share with our audience, what is yarrow and what is this tincture and what is that?
Well, do you want to tell everybody about yarrow more? And I'll demonstrate a few of our, this is a yarrow that I'm hanging above my bed. And we have in our book, one of our two green witch saith to hang the yarrow over your bed for 7 years of a happy marriage. So a yarrow settles the tension in a relationship. And I've also made this, yarrow is great for headaches. It's also, I made this healing salve, and it's named after the Latin name for yarrow is it Achilles or Achilles? What is it, Chris?
Yeah, that's right.
And it's named after Achilles because it was said he used a yarrow salve to on the wounds of the men from the Trojan War. And this one is made with the yarrow safflower flower oil and coconut oil. And I marinated the yarrow buds. You can see that for 2 weeks, and then you strain it, and then you incorporate the coconut oil, and you let it sit, and it becomes this great. It's like it's an astringent. It's really good for your skin, and it's good for rashes and bruises and abrasions.
And then add to that yarrow is a protective plant, and yarrow is a kind of a love plant. It'll be hung over a couple's bed to kind of keep it going, things charged up. And you can wear it in like a sachet, or wear it in a little, what do they call those with that open and close? A little thing around your neck. I can't think of a locket. Wear it in a locket for protection and to attract love.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, like a locket.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Oh, wow. It's a very universal plant. Wow.
It makes a great
Susan, you used the word salve, and that reminds me of Colby Michael's book. He writes about flying ointments and the history of flying ointments. Colby, could you share that with us?
Yes, there's a lot to share about flying ointments, but essentially they are medicinal salves. So an infused herbal extract mixed with a usually wax-based or fat-based thickener They just happen to be made with plants that have consciousness altering properties in association to medieval witchcraft.
Right. Yeah. They're definitely associated with medieval witchcraft. And so what Susan created here is like a flying ointment, right?
Yeah, essentially. And it could be argued that it could be used, in the same way that a flying ointment could be used as well. They're just as much a ritual formula as they are, working on that active chemistry.
Cool.
Our book is vegan, so we don't use the beeswax in the salve.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, so I know that flying ointments were this idea that witches used them, and when we look at medieval witchcraft, a lot of it is the use of plants, and specifically using like dangerous or malefic plants in order to be anecdotes. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. When we look at medieval witchcraft history throughout Europe, a lot of the conversation is surrounding these plants with consciousness altering effects. So we could even kind of equate it to like a more modern day anti-drug campaign.
Oh, that's funny. I had not considered that. Huh. Yeah, I think it's so interesting to look at how we've taken the plants from ancient times and brought them into our modern uses. And that's really Chris and Susan, what you talk about in your book. They're used for all kinds of things. What are ways that people who live in cities or people who can't plant gardens, how can we use them in our lives?
I always recommend that people try to grow some herbs on their windowsills, just because I think it's so important that you have a relationship with the plant before you use it in magic, ideally. And also you can control whether it's organic or not, because even if you're not ingesting the plant, I think that you don't want to use plants that have been, use pesticides and stuff on, because I think that's going to alter the magic in not a good way.
I live in LA. I have a very tiny patio, but I did buy the proper equipment to try to grow. I'm going to try to grow mint and lemongrass. Those are my first two.
Oh, good ones. Good ones. And they're pretty easy ones to grow.
How did they go?
Yeah, how's it going?
Not assembled yet. I'm going to assemble it. By the time that this episode drops, I will post pictures of how that's going.
The one trick with potted plants is you want to keep them watered.
Okay.
Because they'll dry out so fast, especially if it's a sunny windowsill. Just make sure the soil is a little bit moist to the
moist,
not damp, but just a little moist. And then if it's dried out, give them a nice drink. And that's probably like an every other day thing, because it gets, especially in LA, it gets so hot and dry.
It certainly does. And I want to talk more about building the relationship with a plant that you just talked about. Before using it in magic, what are some of these steps that I should be taking to create a meaningful relationship with them?
I think it's as simple as just the nurturing of it.
Okay.
And I'm one of those goofballs that talks to my plants, because I know that on some level they are responding, and they hear, they know when they're loved. I think like anything, or however you want to put it. I think loving them is the first step.
Willow tree. Ashley, don't you have a story about this?
I do, Pythian. When I applied for an internship at TBS, one of the video questions was, what tree would I be? I had 30 seconds to answer. Do you remember what we said?
Of course. The willow tree is associated with healing qualities, a precursor to modern-day aspirin, used to alleviate pain and reduce inflammation. And as a priestess, I am called to heal others. Oh, and by the way, we got that internship.
We just encourage you to do everything with intention and love.
Yeah, that's our thing.
Whether you're making something, you're growing your flowers, you're making this apple chutney that we made this week. We're getting into our fall menu. So we're getting into the fall plants and flowers from our book, and finding different ways to use them.
Yeah, we're all about apples right now.
Okay. Yeah. I like the properties that mint has, so I definitely want to incorporate some of that energy into my life.
And mint's a toughie, so you'll probably do really well with it.
Thank you. Coby, I want to talk about your relationship with baneful plants. Now, you talk about plant spirits. Can you tell me more about like the plant spirits of like the mandrake or any of the herbs that you work with?
Yes, I can. Like we established at the beginning, all plants have spirits. They've got a memory and different characteristics, just like any other individual that we meet, out on our day-to-day lives. So just looking at their stories, their mythology, folklore, and how different people have interacted with them over the centuries can tell us a lot about the characteristics of the plants and their personalities. The baneful plants seem to have just very large and dramatic personalities.
Thank you. So what is the difference between a plant spirit and a plant familiar?
Yes, so a plant familiar is essentially a plant spirit that we have a regular and ongoing relationship or rapport with.
Yeah, like then those. I mean, for me, those tend to be trees. Really, like I'm kind of your classic tree hugger. But in my garden, I have really a couple trees that I really have relationships with, that I spend time with. It's an oak tree that I planted as a baby when I first moved in. And there was a birch tree that recently had to come down. So that was very upsetting because they just don't do well in Southern California. But I really use that for meditation. And I think we really had a connection. It was in a V shape, and I'd put both my hands on it and just sort of close my eyes, and you could feel the pulse of the energy from the tree. I highly recommend tree hugging.
Yeah, I do too. Actually, that was how I first got into energy work.
Really?
When I was, when I was in high school, there was one tree that was in our courtyard, and I was having a real bad day. And I just like went up and I put my hands on the tree and I just released all of like my frustration and my negative energy. And the tree took it and cleansed me. And I was crying. And people were like, what's with that? What's with that weirdo who's crying over the tree?
Yeah, it's true though. They will absorb it. Like, I find if I'm upset and I sit down on the ground with my back up against a tree, it really will do that. It will sort of absorb your anxiety for you. I mean, and I feel like it does it happily.
Yeah, it does.
It just sucks it down back into the earth with its roots and just, it's already grounded.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of lean on them a little bit for a little help with your self-grounding, I think.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Susan, have you ever used trees to ground before?
I would maybe. I mean, I don't think that that's as much. I live in the city, so
She's in Manhattan.
I live in Manhattan. So I think I interact with nature in a different way. And I think it's about what I was saying to you about observing it and experiencing it, not necessarily, like I said, I'm a cook, I'm an artist, and we have many beautiful gardens here. We have we have a lot of different types of outdoor spaces. So it's a different way to experience nature, but it's very vital. And the farmers markets and the plants that we are able to see here, I think it's a nice combination for Chris and I as well. Sort of full circle.
Yeah, you get those two different perspectives. Very cool. So Coby, let's talk about becoming confident in working with plants, whether I'm working with baneful plants or whether I'm working with my sweet little mint outside. How do I gain confidence in growing things?
I don't know if I even have that. It's been a really big, dramatic change for me moving from Indiana, where I'm originally from, down to Florida, just sort of a whole new, planting zone. And then I'm growing indoors versus outdoors. And I've always been more of an outdoor grower. So it's been a little bit of
change for you.
Kind of reimagining how that works.
Yeah, big difference in weather.
Coby, I'm from Indiana too.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, weird. Okay, we've got that in grandpa's.
Oh, Susan, what was your question?
I was just wondering what it's like for you to be in a tropical setting now.
It was difficult at first. It was kind of a little bit depressing because I had all these plans of being able to grow everything all year round, either indoors or just in a warmer environment, and the plants just said no.
No.
My most favorite belladonnas, they just wouldn't grow. I had like a whole year of just empty, dead pots, and so I finally just got rid of them, and it kind of slowly brought some happier plant allies into the mix that are doing much better.
It takes a while to get to know, because when I moved from New York to Southern California, I'd always grown up in that kind of climate of Indiana and New York, that kind of mid-level climate where we had winters and, plants were prepared for the freeze and blah, blah, blah. And I brought some of my mom's peonies with me, and guess what? They died because they need a hard freeze. And I was just like, ah. So you kind of learn, in terms of your confidence with plants, it's a fairly painful process. You'll live through a lot of deaths, but with every plant death, you'll realize, oh, that's because it was, too cold here, or that's because it got too much sun, or, you kind of just have to go for it and know that there's going to be some fatalities.
I will remember that and not feel so bad.
Yeah, it happens.
It teaches you patience.
It does teach you patience. And I have some plants in my garden that, I planted a wisteria about 10 years ago, and I had to wait until just this last spring for it to bloom.
Wow.
They're wildly successful once they're established and they get going. But, it takes them several years before they kind of show off for you. And you have to just kind of get in that space of like, okay, all right, the wisteria is there. I'm just going to keep it alive.
Keep it alive.
Yeah, keep it alive. And one day it's going to pay off.
Yeah. Coby, you talk about alchemy when you're working with plants, and you talk about the baneful plants in particular have a special type of alchemy. Could you share that with me?
Yeah, I can. So alchemy kind of plays an important role in working with poisonous plants or chemically active plants, in the sense that a lot of these original alchemical experiments or preparations were to create formulas that maybe mitigated some of the more toxic properties of plants, or made a more, energetically cohesive formula like we see with spagyrics.
Alchemical. Alchemy refers to the ancient practice of transforming base materials into more refined or spiritual substances, often symbolizing spiritual development.
So different ways to kind of extract and put things back together in a way that they would be able to be used medicinally without killing people.
Now, that's got to be scary to work with stuff and know that like you could mess up and die.
Yeah, it's a real thing.
So like, how did you get confident in doing that? What's your safety process look like?
It took me a few years before I ever actually ingested anything, and that was a really kind of life-changing moment. And with all life-changing moments, they typically only come, once, maybe twice in a lifetime. So it's definitely not something where, to work with baneful herbs or poison plant allies that you're constantly ingesting all of these things. But it was a very formative kind of experience that led to where I'm at now. And it's really through looking back to 19th century and earlier different pharmacy techniques, compounding pharmacy and things like that, to see that people were actually using plants like henbane and datura and deadly nightshade well into the 19th and 20th century. You're really using like the crude plant material people could safely ingest and experiment without having to have like all of this unnecessary fear and trepidation, because it really does sort of feel like you're shooting in the dark when you first start to approach these plants.
I just learned that just recently that Native Americans traditionally used poison oak or poison ivy, depending on which coast you're on, as a medicinal plant, which I was so surprised by, because I'm highly allergic to it. So I read that. I was just like, woo, I had chills. But it's so amazing to me that they were able to kind of wrangle that plant. I don't know if that's how you describe it, Coby, but they were able to kind of wrangle that plant into being something healing when it's traditionally kind of something you avoid.
Yeah, and that's a really good example of just understanding the importance of preparation, and the individual scenario that you're in is very similar to traditional Chinese medicine, where we see a lot of low dose or poisonous ingredients, but it comes down to the way that they are cooked or soaked or even sliced in certain directions, and gets very specific as to the way that they're prepared and applied or ingested has everything to do with whether they're going to be beneficial or harmful.
I want to read your book. I'm so fascinated by this.
I want to read yours too.
Yeah, we'll definitely share, because that was something that I found so interesting reading your book, was like not just the use of the herbs, but like how delicately you have to interact with it. Mother Nature gives us everything we need, but it's those very special recipes and this special way of creating the tincture or working with the alchemical plant. To me, that's like mind blowing. It's a whole nother form of witchery that I am not a part of.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about it either, really, that part of it, the scary plants for me.
Scary plants.
Scary plants.
We're coming from opposite directions. We're trying not to, we're very careful not to poison our readers. I had a couple of weeks ago, I picked up Queen Anne's lace on the side of the road, and I showed it on a video, but I didn't say, you shouldn't make a tea with this, because I did get it on the side of the road next to the train tracks and everything like that. So we're kind of falling over ourselves now to make sure that we say that our plant, all our plants and flowers should be pesticide free.
Right.
Queen Anne's lace is super similar to poison hemlock and water dropwort, which can just like kill you dead really fast.
Queen Anne's lace, Ken?
Wow.
It's very, very similar to
Hemlock.
water dropwort, poison hemlock in appearance. So a lot of times there's misidentification.
Yeah, like it would be bad to get one of the others and then make a jelly with it, like we did with Queen Anne's. Last jelly.
So even some of those lookalikes, because Queen Anne's lace is a lookalike to very deadly plants, it takes on some of those baneful qualities, or maybe what we would consider rebellious or adversarial or taboo. And then we look at its, use as, a women's health contraceptive and all of that. And just kind of symbolically, popping up when all of these women's civil rights issues essentially are going on. Like it's very much like it's so cool. It's got that baneful side to it too, I think.
One of the commonalities that we see between both of your books is that plants can be used to help achieve spiritual work, whether that's a consciousness. What would you call it when you work with plants? How would you describe the spiritual aspect of it?
Well, for us, I think it's the magical mindfulness. I think that that's sort of our brand of magic. And we want people to be more aware and to use the herbs and flowers with intention.
I think that's important, especially right now, as the climate is changing so rapidly, becoming aware of Earth.
Yeah. Yeah. But like Susan was saying, for us, intention is everything with the plants.
And what about you, Coby?
So I would call it green gnosis. That's not my term. That's just a term that floats around a lot, I guess, in the plant spirit community, and is sort of that wordless personal transmission that happens when you grow an herb or read about it or, sit with a picture of it or work with it in a formula. All of these little, subtle like sensory cues and spiritual messages that come through in that process. It's a very big part of it.
Can I poke a little bit and ask if you would share something that you learned?
So when I make a lot of my formulas, I use sort of one key poisonous plant to kind of showcase their energy and their abilities. And then I will incorporate other herbal allies, some essential oils, kind of all based around a theme. But that theme draws from certain core aspects of what that plant spirit is associated with or what their typical correspondences are. So I'm able to kind of bring out some of those qualities. For example, working with Atropa belladonna, which is deadly nightshade, in an aphrodisiac capacity for self-love and personal empowerment, kind of taking a different spin on what's usually seen as dark and spooky. Also very supportive through a lot of these transitory kind of states.
Have you ever worked, just curious, have you ever worked with digitalis for anything? I mean, because that one, I know it's a protective plant and a guardian plant, but I also know it's super poisonous.
Yeah, super poisonous. It contains the cardiotoxin, digitalin, digoxin. I haven't ingested it because it doesn't really have much entheogenic capability beyond like giving you weird light halos and stuff like that.
Entheogenic. Entheogenic refers to plant substances used to induce altered states of consciousnness in rituals or ceremonies.
But I love working with it as a flower essence, which is super duper safe. Foxglove I've found, as you mentioned, being very protective. It is a plant of courage. It is a plant that's supportive for kind of this idea of the wounded warrior. I don't necessarily mean like military people, although they would be within that as well, but we're all kind of warriors. We've accrued our various wounds and battle scars and things like that. And Foxglove comes forward as a really powerful, energetic ally for supporting that and just kind of like giving that helping hand and understanding, sort of a camaraderie kind of a feeling.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that really is. I love learning how we can take these adversarial or malefic plants and use them for our benefit. The earth doesn't create anything that's bad. It's all harmonious. And I want to thank all of you today for joining me and sharing the deep knowledge that we can learn from these plants. Would you please share with our audience, again, the names of your books and where you can purchase them?
Ours is The Green Witch's Guide to Magical Plants and Flowers, and it's Love Spells from Apples to Zinnias. And it's available everywhere. We encourage going to independent bookstores, and if they don't have it, asking them to order it. But you can also get it on Barnes and Nobles and Amazon and stuff like that.
And please follow us on TikTok and on Instagram at 2 Green Witches, the number 2.
The number 2, not the word 2.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Chris and Susan. Your turn, Coby.
And then I have the Poison Path Herbal, published by Inner Traditions Park Street Press. You can find this at all of your local witchy shops and also available online at all of the usual places.
I'm going to order that. Yeah, I wrote that down.
Awesome. And Coby, I'm sorry, did you say where we can find you online?
I'm on social media at Poisoner's Apothecary, and you can visit my website, thepoisonersapothecary.com.
That's cool.
Very cool.
I like that.
Thank you so much again for joining us. And until next time, mystics, stay magical. The Occult Unveiled is produced by F Street Productions and M is for Magic. Our executive producers are Ashley Ryan, Michael A. Simon, and Scott Kushner. Our show is produced by Deborah Simon. Our audio producer is Bill Schultz. Our talent booker is Perry Turcott. Laura Kaufman is our coordinator. Thank you for listening, and for more information on any of the topics you heard today, plus really cool links and ways to learn about Ashley, Pythian, and all of our guests, go to theoccultunveiled.com website. The Occult Unveiled, copyright 2023.